to the SSCUDM webinar. Dr. Gross is an assistant research professor at the Beach Center on Disability at the University of Kansas. She also directs the Family Employment Awareness Training Project, whose purpose is to reach out to individuals with disabilities and their family members and service providers to increase and support the competitive employment of these individuals. She's joining us today to speak about employment expectations and resources for people with disabilities. It's a topic of great interest and importance for this community, and we're really excited to have her today to share her insights with us. So at this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Dr. Gross, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Casey, for the introduction. So we'll go ahead and get started here. As Casey said, we're going to talk about employment expectations and resources. Unfortunately, since we only have an hour, I'm only going to be able to touch on a small number of things. I wish we had so much more time. As Casey mentioned, I have a project called FEAT, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and we do quite extensive training on resources, but hopefully today you will walk away with some information that you didn't know before and that can help you get started on your employment journey. So our webinar agenda for today is first I'm going to talk about developing expectations for employment, and then we'll talk specifically about supported competitive employment and customized competitive employment, and what do those terms mean, and what does that actually look like, and how can we begin to think about employment a little differently. And then I'm going to talk about the role of families in supporting employment. I'm going to give you kind of a broad brush on some resources for funding, services, and information. And then we'll talk a little bit about our program, Family Employment Awareness Training, and then answer questions at the end. But first, we're going to go ahead and start with a little poll here so I can learn a little bit about our audience today. So you'll see a polling question that asks, what age is your child or young adult with a disability? If you go ahead and select something, that would help us get an idea of who we've got out there. All right. Looks like it's starting to wind down a little bit. So it looks like the majority of our attendees fall in that 18 to over 18 and older area. And then we've got some that are just starting to begin that transition process, and some that are even looking ahead, so that's wonderful. So we'll go ahead and get started then, and I'll try to keep those numbers and thoughts in mind as we move forward. So another quick question for you. What are your expectations for your son or daughter to become employed? Do you fully expect them to be employed? Hope that they find the right match? Uncertain? Or think that they maybe won't be employed? Wonderful. All right, so it looks like we have quite a good mix there. We have some people majority of our participants are in that fully expect or hopeful range, with about a fourth of our participants in that uncertain or thinking that they may not be employed. So I hope we can leave today with you feeling at least maybe hopeful, if you're not at hopeful yet. And if you're hopeful, maybe at fully expecting. So let's see where we can go with this today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about expectations for employment. Family plays a very important role in expectations for employment. Family is hugely influential when it comes to developing expectations. As a matter of fact, our research has shown that having high expectations for employment is generally associated with greater job attainment outcomes for children. So we'll talk a little bit later about the ways that families can help to develop expectations for employment for their children. Family are some of the key people in the lives, well, really of everybody. I mean, even as an adult, I continue to rely on my family for support. But this is especially so for our young adults with disabilities, and particularly for those on the autism spectrum that will often rely on their families on into adulthood to help them with supported decision-making and that transition to independence or supported independence. And so that's one of the reasons why we really target families and having that expectation for employment, because it is very influential in the outcomes for your young adults. So in Kansas and Rhode Island, we have a program called Family Employment Awareness Training. And we call it FEAT for short, and it was developed based on these core beliefs you see on the screen now. These core beliefs are expectations about work. And I know that it's hard sometimes to imagine how some of our young adults who display aberrant and aggressive behaviors are going to work. But we're going to talk about some innovative ways to think about employment and provide needed supports on the job. And I know we have a short time, and so we won't be able to go into a whole lot of detail, but hopefully we can expand your knowledge base on employment. So our core beliefs are that everyone can work when provided with appropriate supports and services, that everyone can have a job that's enjoyable and satisfying, and that everyone will always make more money working than by relying on public benefits alone. So in fact, in our training, I do a little bit of math with my participants, because that last core belief there about making more money is kind of a tough one for some people, because there's this myth out there that my son or daughter can only work so much time or earn so much money, or they're going to lose all of their health insurance or all of their Social Security, and we need that. And so we're going to talk about some different ways that our system works that will help dispel that myth and let you know that there is kind of a system in place so that you don't just fall off that benefits cliff. But sometimes we need to talk about it a little bit, because not everybody knows about it. So supported competitive employment, what is that? So I have on here real work. So when I say real work, I mean that it's in a competitive environment. It's in the community with non-disabled peers, and you're paid minimum wage or higher, and preferably, if it works for the employee and his or her needs, 20 hours a week or more, so that individual is truly a member of the work community. So supported competitive employment is often what we see as like a job match. So there's a job that's advertised, and as an employment specialist, I happen to know someone who has a skill set or would like that job, and I try to match a job with an employee that I know, and provide ongoing support services on the job. And so the job coach may assist in finding the job and teaching the job and continuing to support that individual over time. When we talk about customized competitive employment, we're talking, it's very similar. It's slightly different. Again, we're talking about real work. So it's in the community for minimum wage or higher, and it's in businesses with non-disabled peers. However, in customized competitive employment, this is a real individualized approach to employment. It looks at the strengths and interests of the individual with a disability, as well as the needs of the employer. And then the job specialist, or employment specialist, or job coach works to negotiate a job match that works for the individual with a disability and their strengths and passions, as well as it's something that is beneficial to the employer. So part of customized employment is really getting to know the business and knowing what the employer needs and making the job match that way. I think one of the mistakes that some of our job coaches sometimes make is trying to sell the person with a disability as an employee, and really they need to work on finding out what the employer needs and meeting that need. And so customized employment really focuses on the needs of the employer and how to match that with somebody's strengths and interests as an employee. So we're going to talk about a few different types of supported and customized competitive employment. These are some different kinds of ways to think about employment, especially if you're an individual who maybe you aren't that round peg that's going to fit right in that round hole of the job description. You know, maybe that job description needs some modification, or you are eligible or qualified or skilled at parts of the job but not the whole job. So we're going to talk about some ways to address that in customized employment. The first one we'll talk about here are created jobs. So created jobs are when we establish a new job or job duties that didn't previously exist as a position within a business. So this is very driven by the skills and support needs of the individual as well as the needs of the business. One example of this is an example of a young man who really enjoyed working with mechanical items, and he did really well in different types of jobs when he had support. And so the job coach negotiated a created job for him at a tractor and implements dealer and mechanic. And so this dealership also took in tractors and lawnmowers and repaired them. And the owner had always wanted to detail the tractors after he serviced them and before returning them, a way of kind of boosting their customer service. But they never consistently had the time or had someone who they could devote to doing that task. So for this young man who had an interest in mechanical things, they started a position for him as an implements detailer. And they provided natural job supports with coworkers that prompted him as needed or checked his work. They created a visual task list showing what each step of the cleaning process was so that he just followed this visual book, task analysis of the job to help him complete the steps. So it's one way of thinking about employment and how to meet both the needs of the individual and the employer. Carved jobs are another type of customized employment. This occurs when we redistribute job duties from one position to another, tailoring them to a job seeker's unique skills or abilities. Job carving is really a way of kind of making somebody's assets and strengths the strengths and assets for the employer, and it creates kind of a cost-effective strategy. So it's a way of finding maybe those tasks that everybody should be doing that kind of fall through the holes, or those tasks that maybe take up time and could be devoted to one person to complete those. One example of this is a young man with some fairly complex multiple disabilities, and he got a job checking in books at a bookstore. They figured out what types of support needs he needed to interact with the computer system, and his entire job was to check in books into this inventory of this large bookstore. And so that was a job that had frequently been done by numerous different associates at the bookstore who, when there was time, somebody might get assigned that, or when there was a need, somebody was taken from one task to go do that. So instead of pulling people away from customers or pulling people away from the floor, this became just Andy's job. Another example of this might be if you have someone who can do filing. Filing is one of those things that often backs up in offices, particularly if it's not a big priority. And I know that there have been several ways of sort of structuring a sorting system, particularly for individuals who may not be capable of alphabetizing down to a certain level. So there's ways of structuring that environment and that work system to make that work for them. So let's go ahead and talk about another type of customized employment called resource ownership. This is another way of looking at the support needs or the needs of the employer and figuring out how to match that with somebody's skills and interests and strengths. So a lot of times, I like to akin resource ownership to having a college degree. So I have a college degree, and by having this college degree, when somebody hires me, they have this idea that I know certain things. So it's an asset for me to have this college degree. Well, as opposed to having a piece of paper that says what somebody knows, they may have a machine or a piece of equipment or a skill that they can bring into a business that enhances that business in some way. One example of this would be a daycare provider. Maybe it's a smaller, more local daycare provider who would like to have opportunities for students to engage in one-on-one work with someone, maybe doing some educational software or some individualized reading with somebody. One example was a family, this young adult really enjoyed working with little ones and enjoyed that one-on-one experience with the little kids and did really well and really enjoyed computers. So they got VR to buy him a computer and some educational software, and a daycare hired him to go from room to room and scheduled him to work with individualized students in each classroom and work on different types of literacy software, educational software with the students. And so it became a way of enhancing the academic services provided by that facility, as well as creating an asset that he brought with him to the job that made him a valuable employee. So another type of employment I'd like to talk about is self-employment. Now, self-employment is certainly not for everybody. My family had my husband was self-employed, and certainly in my experience and in the experience of a lot of people I know, when you own a business, it's never just one person in the family who is involved in that business. So I've met a lot of business owners, and many times it's a family-supported type of business. But it can be very freeing to have a business because you can have a lot of freedom to do different types of tasks, to set your hours, or to choose the environments in which you enjoy spending your time. Pictured on your screen is Poppin' Joe. Some of you may know of Poppin' Joe. He's kind of famous, actually. He lives here in Kansas, in Lewisburg, Kansas, and he has a kettle corn business. And his kettle corn business does exceptionally well. Joe has Down syndrome and autism, and he has very little verbal communication. He uses an augmentative communication device to present about his business and communicate with others. And Joe owns his business. He is proud of his business. He has employees who also work as his support providers. Joe knows how to do every part of the process of this business, and one of the things that is freeing for him in having this business is that he gets to choose whatever part of it he wants to work on. So if he's popping corn for a while and he decides he doesn't want to pop corn anymore and he wants to bag it, he can move on to that. And as his parents say, since Joe's the boss, Joe gets to choose what he works on and gets to choose what other people work on. So he gets some freedom there, and Joe is well known, and his business does exceptionally well. And so it's one good example. Another example I'd like to share with you that I wish I had shared a photo on here is I've known a number of individuals who have discovered special passions and talents in art. And there's a young man in Kentucky named Trent Marquette. His website is trentsstudio.com. And he does some amazing abstract and multimedia art. He's won awards. As a matter of fact, one of his paintings was the United Nations award-winning artist for the Autism Awareness Stamp. So there's some very interesting types of ways to think about self-employment when you look at trying to discover what are those gifts and talents of the individual. Another type of self-employment to talk about real briefly is business within a business. This is a way of taking that self-employment venture and situating it within another business so you have lower overhead and some natural supports built in. One example of this might be like putting a bookstore in a coffee shop and working out a deal with the owner to ring up the product for, say, a small percentage of the proceeds. So that's another way to look at self-employment there. Another type of employment to think about that is not really a customized employment, but it is supported employment, is the employer-initiated models that are out there right now. There are many of them. Several of our corporations are seeing the importance of this growing population of individuals as new workers and trying to see how they can adjust their practices to be more welcoming. Project Search is one that is really an international program that focuses on ensuring that young adults have internship opportunities before they graduate from high school, and meaningful internship opportunities that lead to full employment. Both Walgreens and AMC theaters have adjusted how they do their business, how they design their environments to support employees on the job. So there's a couple of employer-initiated models that would be good to look into. There's some great YouTube videos out there on both Project Search and Walgreens, well, and AMC. They all have some YouTube videos out there showing their great work. So let's talk real fast. There's just some broader ways to think about employment. Let's look at another poll. So as you've been thinking about employment, what steps has your family taken toward the employment of your son or daughter? Have you met with a team to brainstorm or plan? Have you developed an employment goal, or looked for or applied for jobs, or perhaps even interviewed for jobs? Or even just contacting a service agency that might be able to help in some way. Looks like we're getting lots of good responses here and quite a broad brush all the way across. Interesting. Coming up almost even all the way across. We've got looks for and applied for jobs, planning, and not taking any steps yet seem to be in the lead. So it can be kind of overwhelming, and really any one of these things listed up above, taking some of those steps can get you just a wee bit closer to employment. But we'll talk about some of those and how to begin thinking about planning for employment. So family role in transition. As we spoke earlier, family plays a huge role in developing expectations for employment and are especially important in the transition to adulthood process. Everyone continues to rely on their families on into adulthood. For individuals with disability, this is especially important because families have one consistent and ongoing support in their lives. And families are the one individuals who truly know that job seeker the best. Know what makes them tick, know what their strengths and their passions are, know how they best communicate. And sometimes, unfortunately, our service providers may not be as knowledgeable in working with individuals with autism as we would like. And that can be tough, I know, because you may always feel like you're kind of in the position of educating someone. But it's really important as a family to try really hard to build those shared partnerships and to cultivate those partnerships with providers. I know it can be challenging, but that makes it so especially important to be able to have that positive partnership and share your parental expertise. This type of partnership development may include strategies such as sharing responsibility for tasks that need to be accomplished, ensuring that you and the service provider are sharing the same goal. For without that same goal, you're not going to make any progress. Do you both have your eye on the same type of work environment for the individual? Sharing your child's strengths and passions, and supporting the service provider to approach your child's employment from a strengths-based perspective. Sometimes I mentioned earlier, sometimes service providers feel the need to sell the individual with a disability, and I think that sometimes gets us focusing on the deficits that somebody has, whereas if we focus on strengths and passions and how that person's strengths can fill somebody's employment needs, it can be a much more positive way to get somebody in the door and in a job. And this can be done by sharing examples of skills through videos or portfolios, or and I apologize if you guys are hearing this noise in the background. There's some stuff going on in our neighborhood here. Hold on. I'm going to pick this up and put it on my ear because I'm afraid that you guys are going to be hearing all of the moving going on. Sorry for the interruption. So partnership strategies.
You can share examples of skills through video or portfolio, celebrate successes together, and offer solutions on how to overcome any challenges that your young adult may be experiencing. The thing about transitioning to adulthood is that all the supports and services are behind a bunch of different doors. And instead of just having that one door, like at school where you have all those supports and services in one place, it really takes creative and supportive partnerships to make it all come together in adulthood. So there are several very specific things that families can do with their son or daughter and others in their support network to help your son or daughter to prepare for, attain, and maintain employment. So the first one would be modeling employment and work ethic. So talking about the importance of work and pointing out the many different types of workers in our communities. This helps to stimulate interest with your young adult. Also, engage your child in work practice. And by work practice, I mean chores and routine responsibilities. It can be as simple as having the expectation that every day your son or daughter walks in the door that they hang their backpack up and put away their shoes when they get home. Or helping with basic household chores such as gathering the trash or rinsing the dishes or vacuuming. I know for some of our young adults, some of these tasks could be challenging too. However, using some visual supports and building routine around these basic work tasks can build that expectation of following steps and completing tasks as expected. It's also important to encourage and support independence, so fade your supports over time. I know sometimes we just want to do it, whatever it is, so that it's done right and done quickly, but try not to forfeit supporting independence by always doing something for somebody. Also really look and figure out what makes your son or daughter tick. You know, what do they dream of? What makes them laugh or sparkle or obsess? What are their contributions and their passions? And how can you use that to assist with brainstorming business and job ideas? You know, sometimes we find that somebody has a very focused interest on something, and we can take that focused interest and figure out what about it is so interesting and build a job in that environment that supports that growing interest. It's also really important, you know, to share your job contacts, network. You know, so many of us got jobs or applied for jobs or learned about jobs because of somebody we knew. And I've had parents express, you know, oh, is that wrong for me to try to get my son or daughter a job with someone I know? Certainly not. It happens every day in every work environment, whether or not somebody has a disability. So use your network. Share your job contacts with your job coach specialists. Inform your job coach, your child's job coach, of any problems or issues. And sometimes there's that thing that happens, a rough night, an unexpected broken hand, things that surprise us that can really throw our young adults off on their ability to follow through with a routine or a schedule. It's really important to make sure that those issues are shared so that it's understood, you know, how best to support that individual to move forward with their day. Also participate in problem solving and monitor the service quality and delivery. And finally, it's really important to help your young adult to the best of their ability to understand his or her disability and what their support needs are. Because when they become employed, it becomes their responsibility to advocate for themselves about what works for them and what doesn't work for them. This can be especially important if you have a young adult, say, with Asperger's syndrome, who may have, you know, what we call that a hidden disability, where on the surface, you know, they've got the academic skills and they can do the tasks, but maybe there's some social barriers that get in the way of them successfully attaining or maintaining a job. And so understanding their disability and their support needs and the importance of being able to advocate for that and what their rights and responsibilities are with regard to being an employee with a disability on the job. So we have another poll here. We're going to talk about some resources in a minute. So have you contacted any service organizations or agencies about attaining or maintaining employment or getting supports and services? All right, we're getting some good answers here, it looks like. Looks like we've got a lot of people who are using services already, so that's great. Again, we're almost about split into thirds here, evenly divided on those who haven't used, some who've called but aren't using, and some who are using services. So I know sometimes I've had people say that, well, I've called, but they haven't called me back yet. So be persistent in reaching out and accessing those services, because they really do affect your ability to maintain that employment over time. So we're going to talk about some of those resources that you could be reaching out to, and take a look at what are some of those resources, what types of supports do they provide. There are really so many different kinds of resources that can be used to support employment. However, unfortunately, not all of them are common knowledge. We're just going to be able to touch on a small number of these today, but hopefully you'll learn about some that you were not aware of. All right, so first we're going to talk about vocational rehabilitation services. This is a service that you should have been connected with before you graduated high school. If you weren't, it's not too late. You can connect with VR at any time. If you had a job and you lost a job, you can always go back to VR. VR is what we call Vocational Rehabilitation Services. In some states it might be called the Department of Rehabilitation Services. I hear a lot of states have the abbreviation of DORS, D-O-R-S. But Vocational Rehabilitation Services is a disability-specific employment service, and their job is to help you find a job, to assess your job interests, your job skills, help you find that job match and learn the job. However, vocational rehabilitation services doesn't last forever. A lot of our young adults need ongoing supports on the job. Vocational rehabilitation services generally last 18 to 24 months, and they generally close the case when the individual is competitively employed. However, there may be a lot of times when our young adults continue to need supports and services on the job to be able to maintain that job. Some individuals need that type of support and service every single day. And if you need a job coach every day so you can work, that's still okay. You're still going to do better off working than not working. And some individuals just need that job coach to come in, check in once a week, or run interference with the boss if there's some miscommunication. So one way you can access some of those services is through Medicaid. Medicaid has a number of different programs. Medicaid is really the primary insurance provider for people with disabilities as far as health insurance goes. But they also provide something called home and community-based services. These are often referred to as the waiver, and these waivers usually have supported employment services on them. When you opt for home and community-based services, you are deciding not to go into institutionalized services, so not to go into a residential institution, and so that's good. We want you in your home and your community, working and living there. So home and community-based services can often provide supported employment. However, they tend to have income and asset limits that leave our individuals, well, pretty poor. And this is where that myth comes in about falling off that cliff and losing insurance and losing services. But you don't have to. So Medicaid also provides something called the Medicaid Buy-In Program. This is an optional state Medicaid benefit for workers with disabilities who have earnings in excess of the traditional Medicaid rules. So, if your earnings are high enough that your SSI, your Supplemental Security Income check, is being eliminated, then you're eligible for the Medicaid Buy-In Program. Medicaid buy-in programs typically have much higher income and asset rules. For instance, in Kansas, you can save up to $15,000 in a savings account, have unlimited retirement accounts, and make up to, I think, approximately $60,000 a year and maintain your Medicaid health insurance as well. So typically, Medicaid buy-in programs also provide for personal assistance services, so they can continue to support someone to be employed on the job. And those personal assistance services can provide transportation as well as any other number of services needed for someone to continue to be employed. So next we'll talk about some other benefits you've probably heard about, several that come from our Social Security Administration. So I just mentioned supplemental security income. So supplemental security income is one source of income for individuals with disabilities who are unable to be fully employed or maintain employment. Social Security disability insurance is another source of income for individuals with disabilities who need support with employment. Those two benefits are typically affected by employment. And so I mention those here because people usually worry a whole lot about losing these benefits. There's a number of ways that you can work with it so that you don't lose needed benefits. For instance, a couple of these are some Social Security work incentives programs. And you'll see there I have listed impairment-related work expenses, often referred to as IRWE, I-R-W-E, and the Plan for Achieving Self-Sufficiency. It's PASS, P-A-S-S. Those are both Social Security work incentives. Those are ways of providing money for supports and services when maybe you don't have enough supports and services provided through VR or Medicaid. So it could be anything. So for impairment-related work expenses, in this scenario, I'm able to deduct expenses that I need as a result of my disability to be employed. For instance, if I needed a bus pass, my monthly bus pass would be an expense that was deducted from what is called my countable income, which is what is used to determine my SSI and my SSDI. Well, used to determine my SSI, not my SSDI. So, so IRWE can account for, if you don't have services, you can pay for your own services and deduct it from your income, and your SSI check's not going to go down because you may be making an income, but if you're spending some of that income to pay for your services, it becomes deducted from your income, so that doesn't count when they figure out your SSI check. PASS plans are a way of actually saving money for a job goal that doesn't count towards your asset limit when it comes to eligibility for services. It's one I really encourage you to look into because it's a really underused work incentive. Workforce centers are another great resource. These are actually what we would call a generic resource, meaning that they're not disability specific. Sometimes they're called job centers or career one-stop centers, but they're in every state. They offer a lot of supports and services around job searching, resume development, mock interview classes if you struggle with interviews, computer proficiency certifications. They also frequently have youth summer employment programs. And when they talk about youth, I've been told that they consider pretty much anyone in their 20s as a youth. And so a lot of times they will also provide paid work experiences over the summer. So it's definitely a resource to check out. Should be one in your community. Centers for Independent Living are another resource to look into. You just need to self-identify as having a disability. You don't have to have any federal Social Security designation as having a disability. But they can help with interview skills, transportation training, managing your money, social skills, and many other life skills related to employment. And another final state resource I'd like to mention are community mental health centers. Community mental health centers often do tend to be very supported employment focused. And sometimes our individuals on the spectrum may be dual diagnosed. So this may be another good resource. A few resources I want to share with you about funding. There's some ways to save money that doesn't count towards your income and assets when you're looking at eligibility for services. One of them are individual development accounts. So these are matched savings accounts that help people with modest means to save towards 3 primary goals: purchasing a home, continued education, training or college, and small business development. For instance, Kansas has an individual development account that is available to people with disabilities, and it's called the CASH program. And for every dollar you save, they contribute $2. So it's a way of bolstering your savings, and they will also tend to be paired with financial education classes to help you to learn how to manage money as well. Special needs trusts are another way of saving money for future needs for an individual. They're just life needs. But these tend to be different from state to state, and there are lots of different kinds. You'll need to make sure you speak with a lawyer about a special needs trust. However, we have something really cool that our federal government has done recently called the ABLE Act. This was recently passed. Each state is currently coming up with the regulations or may have recently come up with them. But it's a tax-free savings account for individuals with disabilities that covers qualified expenses like education, housing, transportation, any other of basic living expenses, and it doesn't affect asset eligibility. It can also be used to support employment. So you can set money aside, and it works just like a 529 college savings account. And so it helps you to create a little nest egg to meet basic needs, because as we all know, Social Security just really can't cover it all. All right, I'm going to see if I can get through here a little bit. All right, so this next page has got some information resources for you. I'm just going to let you skim through those on your time here. We've got the first one's just information and job related. The second one is Asperger's Syndrome Training and Employment Partnership. They work with employers and individuals on the autism spectrum to create a more inclusive workplace and educate really employers about individuals on the spectrum and individuals on the spectrum about working with corporations. And the last one is a good information article about different types of ways of thinking about employment and looking at job characteristics. So I'm going to take just a few brief minutes here to run through my training that we do. We do this in Kansas and Rhode Island. As we mentioned, it's to increase expectations and knowledge for people with disabilities around employment. And we focus on self-advocacy and problem-solving skills and build capacity through a train-the-trainer model. We work with our state's Parent Training and Information Center to deliver the trainings, and we partner with our public schools to recruit families and educators to attend. And our workforce centers, I mentioned that resource earlier, they help us do our follow-up technical assistance and introduce families to a new resource. We talk about all those great supported and customized employment options that I mentioned earlier, as well as the family role in transition to adulthood, school to work, as well as pediatric to adult health care. We cover numerous resources. I was only able to cover a few with you today, but in FEAT we generally cover approximately 26 different types of employment resources that can help you to attain and maintain employment over time. We also talk about anti-discrimination laws and what are the rights and responsibilities of the individual with a disability to disclose or not disclose their disability, and the responsibilities of the employer should they choose to. Finally, in our training, we also work on doing some small group planning activities and young adult breakout sessions so that when families leave, they have a good idea or good plans to take with them into an IEP or a person-centered planning team meeting to prepare and plan for their future employment. Some of the stuff that we're doing with FEAT right now is we are currently in Rhode Island addressing culture change there. Really happy to be implementing FEAT there and beginning to do research as well to see how effective it is. And we have some training still going in Kansas this fall and are going to be conducting our follow-up research in this next year. We are keeping our fingers crossed that we may be awarded a grant to expand to Delaware and South Dakota. So if you're in those states, keep your fingers crossed for us. But we're also exploring other avenues to take feet into other states, as we've had a lot of interest from various types of organizations in different states. And so, sort of sped through that last part, but I want to make sure I have time to answer any important questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Dr. Gross. It was a really interesting talk, a lot of really good information. I have a lot of questions. I just want to let everybody know we'll get to as many of these as we can, but Dr. Gross has very generously offered to answer some of them offline if we can't get to everything today, in which case we'll post it on the EN website along with the video at some point afterwards. So let's see. We have a lot of people asking about the role of the job coach in the family, and so a lot of folks may not necessarily have easy access to a job coach, and they're wondering if some of these things that you've discussed that a job coach would do are things they could do on their own, and if there are any resources to walk them through.
Oh, wow. Yes, so you can definitely do it on your own. And quite honestly, I've known families that have chosen to do it on their own because they've been very unhappy with the job coaches that they had access to, particularly in supporting someone on the spectrum. I know that sometimes our service providers may not be as educated or may not be as available, because I know in Kansas we are kind of short on supported employment providers. So definitely you can do it on your own. There are some resources that are incredibly helpful. There's one that I strongly recommend. Virginia Commonwealth University has a wealth of employment information on their work support website. So again, Virginia Commonwealth University on their work support website. They have numerous resources and information. APSE, the Association for Persons Supporting Employment First, is an organization that I believe has a brochure on quality indicators when you're looking for employment specialists, if you're looking at trying to interview possible service providers. And if you want to do it yourself, there's lots of supports out there as well. Griffin and Hamas is another great resource for lots of good information and short sheets on what are supported employment and what's the best way to go about finding out about employers and what types of approaches to take with supporting employment and finding that right job match. So definitely you can and yeah, don't just wait. If you want to reach out, then do it. I had a family who had trouble getting a supported employment provider, so they just did it on their own, and it worked out great for them. So.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. There's also people concerned about, I guess it's sort of the same situation, but in the future when the family members themselves may not be available to help the person with a disability, if there are resources available for adults with disabilities that could sort of function in place of the family member in a way if they need some more support to help advocating for themselves.
Absolutely. So I've known some families that have developed what they call microboards. I think microboards were first developed in Canada, but it's basically a group of people who have committed, who are close to the individual with a disability and the family, and who have committed to be that ongoing support for that person, and they meet annually and keep everybody informed on what's going on with that individual, so that should anything ever happen to the family and they become unable or unavailable to provide support, that individual has somebody who knows them, who can advocate for them and what they want.
Perfect. All right, so switching gears a little bit, we've had several people ask about, in particular for high-functioning individuals, whether or not they should disclose this on applications. Is it better to talk about the strengths and potential weaknesses? Should they put it on their application? Should they speak to their boss if they're having difficulties?
Right.
How should they handle it?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I know a lot of our young adults, especially if they're on the Asperger's syndrome end of things, don't want to disclose their disability because they just want to be viewed like everybody else. But sometimes that lack of disclosure, the social piece, really is what gets them fired frequently. And so in my experience, if you're on that end of the spectrum where it may be one of those hidden disabilities, if you can get into the interview process, you can wait and do it there. Nothing says you have to do it on the application. You can disclose at any time. You can disclose during the application process. You can disclose during the interview process. You can disclose after you've gotten the job. And at any point in time, once you have made that disclosure, the employer has the responsibility to provide reasonable accommodations, assuming that you have the skills to do the job, and so that you are qualified to do the job. And so one of the things I find with our young adults with Asperger's syndrome is that having that disability disclosure can be very helpful. And to phrase it in terms of what helps you to be successful as opposed to what a weakness is. So for example, I may struggle with taking things very literally. And so it is helpful to me. I do better in conversations when people don't use idioms or phrases of speech that are idiosyncratic or don't make literal sense. So helping to explain what I do really well with this. I am excellent at entering data when I have clear steps for the data entry process written down. I function really well with written directions. I struggle with social skills, and sometimes I may have the wrong facial expression for the activity at the time. If you could prompt me when that happens, that would be helpful. So there's lots of ways that you can let people know about the challenges that you may experience, but what types of supports make you successful as opposed to what problems you might have.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thanks. And actually related to that, folks are wondering if there are specific tips you may have as far as interviews or resources that individuals can access to help them with the interviewing process. And just so you know, Judith, I'm going to put up the employment resources screen again really quickly because some folks are asking for it. I'm just going to switch that screen.
Yeah,
there we go.
Absolutely. And let me actually back that up here. Hold on, let me scroll and find that one. Where did it go? So on the slide, we have workforce centers listed, and they have mock interviewing classes all the time and can assist with interviews there. And actually with our recent passage of the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, our workforce centers have been charged to be more active in supporting people with disabilities in employment. And so going in and signing up for some of those mock interview sessions would be very helpful, and explaining maybe what your challenges may be so that somebody can help you through that process. Also, our Centers for Independent Living and any of those organizations that are providing supported employment support, like our community mental health centers, may assist with the interview process as well. And depending on how significant someone's support needs are, you may want or need the assistance of somebody actually in the interview with you. So it could be that you have your support provider in the interview with you, or even asking for what's called a working interview, where as opposed to sitting in an office having a conversation about the job, you're shown the job tasks, given a chance to try out the job tasks. Some different ways to approach interviewing and think about how to restructure an interview process perhaps to meet somebody's communication or support needs.
Perfect. I think I might have time for about one more question, and as I said, we have a number of other ones, and we'll send these to Dr. Gross, and she can give us some of her thoughts on some of these at a later date. But we have a number of questions about the types of jobs and job skills that are that you found that adults have the most kind of success with. I imagine this is very individual, so perhaps maybe a better question is, how can they go about grooming these skills throughout high school, the ones that would work best for them so that they can transition better into employment? What resources might schools be able to offer them?
So schools are supposed to do a transition assessment. So that is one way in which you can try to identify somebody's strengths or interests. This, as Libby put up on the screen there, that choosing the right job for people with autism or Asperger's syndrome, that's a really neat article online. It really talks about some specific, what would be considered maybe typical traits of individuals on the spectrum, and what types of jobs would be good for that individual. And also really just sort of thinking about, what is that individual's interests or passion, and how do we try to tap into that and find that right job match. For instance, it could be that someone is especially skilled especially organized and skilled at attention to detail. So for instance, with my research, we send out hundreds of surveys, and having somebody who can have focused attention to detail and entering that data accurately and correctly is really important to me. And for instance, I did hire my project search intern, and she does just that for me, and she's amazing at it. However, less structured tasks are much more challenging for her. Things where she has to be more of a free thinker, or where I ask her to give an opinion about something, are more difficult, and so I know that I have to provide more structure there. So, thinking about, where are those skill sets that are especially strong for that individual, whether it's organization or attention to detail or an artistic talent, or maybe it's a particularly social person who's extremely great with kids but really awkward with adults. What are those interests and skills that you can tap into and try to think broadly about the different types of jobs that might employ those skills.
Perfect. All right. Well, and once again, Dr. Gross, I really appreciate your time today and talking to us. So a lot of positive feedback from our audience on the webinar. I just want to remind everybody one more time that we have recorded the webinar. We'll post this on the SSCADN website, so that if you haven't had a chance to write down the links or read through the resources, you will have opportunity to do that. We should have it posted in about a week. Sometimes it takes 2 weeks. It will go up and it will be there. And we also will probably have some follow-up questions for Dr. Gross. I know we didn't get to everyone today. I appreciate again, Dr. Gross, your time and effort here. Yeah, and everybody else for attending. And we'll be sending out information on our next SSCADN webinar in the future. Thanks again, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.